All right, so we have our quorum of the 6 of us. Jeremy is on the bottom. Okay, good.
Can
Right.
I just say Marin's a wimp?
No. How come I'm so dark in my picture? All right. Well, let's start our staff review meeting. It's by my time at 6:04, Thursday, April 1st. This is a staff review meeting for the Murray City Planning Commission, and commissioners here: Travis Ney, Sue Wilson, Jake Pearson, Lisa Milkevich, Jeremy Lowry, and myself, Ned Hacker. Marin Patterson is chair. She's excused tonight, so being vice chair, I have the opportunity to have the meeting this evening. And staff, we have, is Melinda there? Yep, there's Melinda Greenwood, Jared Hall, Zachary Smallwood, Susan Nixon, and Bryant. Maybe Bryant isn't here yet, or maybe he is.
He'll be in for the regular meeting.
Okay. All right. So with that, we have minutes. Everybody get to read minutes, 2 sets of minutes. Any comments? Think they look good? We talked about minutes last time, and I think I gave the staff some additional comments. So
I'd like to just thank the group for letting me make that correction of February 18th minutes, and thank the staff for making the corrections. I appreciate it.
Yep. Else, anything? All right. So what I was going to ask in the meeting to make a motion to do both sets of minutes at the same time instead of 2 sets of motions. So, all right, good. Conflict of interest, any conflict of interest with our agenda item?
As I mentioned in my email, I've got a prepared statement that I need to read when we do conflict of interest.
Okay.
So
All right.
just plan
That'll
on
be
you
good.
giving me a minute to do that.
Sure. All right. And approval of findings of fact. We have one of those, which is the, what was that?
It's an ADU, and I've got that
yeah.
ready if you want me to do it.
Yep, sure. Chavez accessory dwelling unit.
Yes.
Yep. All right. That's good. All right. And Hamlet development, general plan amendment and zone map amendment. So Jared's going to do a presentation for that.
Yes. So I'm just, it's the only item on the agenda. So I'll give you a brief overview and then let you ask any questions that you have. If we have leftover time, you can take it to recenter. I have the applications are like we usually do, reviewed together in the presentation. So we're not doing a review of the application to amend the zoning and versus a review to amend the general plan. It's all contained together. The 2 applications are dependent on one another as well. So we've reviewed them that way. What I've tried to do is go through the basics of it. It's 8.06 acres. Right now, it's all zoned, just so everyone is perfectly clear. Right now, it is all zoned A1 agriculture. It is in 2 different land use categories for the future land use map, however. One of them being parks and open space, that's the west parcel, and the other one being low density residential, that's the east parcel where the building and the satellite dishes are currently. The west parcel is in the parks and open space designation. It's the empty parcel leading down to the power corridor. I think I put it in the staff report, but just to be clear how it had ended up in that category instead of low density residential, like most of the sort of developable land that was in agricultural zoning was put, is because we assumed that it was part of the, wrongly, that it was part of the UPNL power corridor when we went through with the consultants. So it got mistakenly included, in our opinion, in that open space and parks. It wasn't intended to become a park. It should have been categorized as low density residential with the other. And at that time, we didn't do that. So we've kind of treated in the reporting and in the presentation, we've dealt more with the aspect of changing from low density residential categories to medium density residential categories rather than the open space jump, if that makes sense, right? With that said, that is the application, and we did give you in your staff reports the material that Mr. Brodsky had presented to the neighborhood. We don't normally, as you guys are aware, we don't normally go over a lot of detail about conceptual plans or concept plans and rely on those for zone changes because we can't rely on that plan. It's not an application for that plan, and I'll make that clear in the presentation for the public. It's an application to change the zone and the general plan that supports that zone. But we included those materials in your packet because there was that neighborhood meeting in February, and it was very well attended. I don't know how many people, Mike, but a lot of people I heard were there. So a lot of folks from the neighborhood have seen that plan and have now seen the revisions to that plan that Mr. Brodsky made after the meeting to kind of respond. And since that information was already out there, we felt like a lot of the comments refer to that plan and the things that they've seen. So we didn't want those comments that you were going to see and read, and I know there were a lot of them, those emailed comments. We didn't want those not to make sense to you all, and we didn't know if you had seen that plan, not having participated in the neighborhood meeting. So we felt like it was important for you to have that information, and it's part and parcel of, it's the reason that he's applying for what he's applying for. And it is significantly less density than is allowed by the Rm15 zone. But overall, this is important to understand too, and I'll go over it a little bit in the presentation. Rm15 zoning, multifamily residential zoning at 15 units the acre, right? Sort of wrong. And I know that Jeremy and Jake, you guys probably haven't dealt with this yet, being newer to the commission, but our multifamily zones monikers are a little strange. So Rm15 zoning, the base density that's allowed is actually 12 units per acre, not 15, like you would think. 15 is possible if you do a host of things to get density bonuses one at a time, and there's be possible for anybody to meet. So we typically look at it as 12 units to the acre, but technically you could get 15 if you did certain things. So that's something to understand as well going into it. Those are the basic tenets of the applications. I'm going to talk about the reasons that staff is supporting the applications based on the general plan. And I'm going to try to, we've read all the email comments like all of you have at this point too. And they're kind of an emerging series of issues that people brought up. And I'm trying to, in the presentation, address those things as we go through it. So I'll talk about the traffic study, and I'll talk about the general plan and why we feel like it is appropriate to entertain a change to that plan, et cetera. So any questions for me?
Jared, will you be addressing the contaminated soil in your presentation?
Very briefly, and I know that Mike has a presentation planned as well, and it deals somewhat with how he can remove that or what's more appropriate with that. And having done a lot of projects where that's necessary, he's more an expert at that than I'll ever be. So I'm going to let Mike speak to the contamination more so than my presentation.
Jared,
Okay, thank you.
Jared, a lot of the comments referenced apartments being built in the area.
Yeah.
Has Mr. Brodsky or Garbett Homes, have they indicated if these will be for sale or for lease?
Yes, and they're intended for sale. That's the plan. And with Hamlet, that's usually the case. So
is it possible for us to have that be a condition of approval, or is that not possible?
the short answer is no. We can't dictate as a government entity whether people rent or buy.
Okay.
Homeowners associations can do that to some degree. What I can tell you is that Garbett and Hamlet typically build for sale product. They want to do these as condominium and single family. Actually, in the new plan, he's got single family detached and condominium units.
No condominiums.
Yeah. Yep.
Jared, can I speak?
Sure. What town?
I'm sorry. I want to correct one thing you just said.
Sure.
That's a big distinction. There are no condominiums in this proposal. These are fee simple townhouses where the owner of each individual townhouse owns the ground that they are on. Much different than a condominium.
Go ahead, Travis. Thank you.
Can I can I shift gears just a little bit and maybe have either Jared or Melinda kind of talk about public clamor and our role in interpreting clamor?
Sure. I'm happy to talk about it. Melinda, do you want to talk a bit about clamor, or do you want me to do that?
Well, let me just say real quickly, some of the public comments have said, you know, why hasn't the city cleaned this up? Why has the city let the site be contaminated? And the simple answer is because it's not our property. So we would love to have it cleaned up, but the city is not interested in doing it at the expense of the taxpayers. So when it develops, that would be part of the development. Public clamor is, Jared, I'll let you take that. You're probably, public clamor is a little bit more relevant in this case to the city council because they're the deciding body. They're the land use authority on a general plan amendment or a zone map amendment. But essentially it has to do with asserting opinions that just aren't germane to the application at hand. So I don't know, a common one is the misnomer that it's going to bring crime. Well, we don't know that, and we can't base an application decision off of that because there's just not facts or data that support one way or another on that. Jared probably has a little bit more value to offer on that, but
I just think you're right on, Melinda. I think the most important thing to remember as a public body of any kind, reviewing applications, is that you're taking comment from people. You need to keep viewing them as comments. You actually have the burden of voting when you've assimilated all those comments and decided what is relevant and what might just be based on clamor. But I think a lot of public, sometimes they have the sentiment that it doesn't matter because I'm saying all this, but my vote doesn't matter in the end. It's not a vote. You're taking comments and trying to use those comments to make reasonable decisions based on them, of course, but also based on what's reasonable being the operative term. So, Lisa.
Can I ask you a question? I'm already a little stressed about this because I don't know, I think it's important that we express we are not voting for a team, that we have an opinion about a team. It's important that we're looking at the facts and trying to base it on the facts and that we consider all teams important.
Sure.
So that's my part of the stress of this, I think. But to that end, could you help me think through the process or tell me what, to me, in my mind, this is, does this land get developed or does it not? Because we have a great applicant with a good plan to develop it. It's appropriate. So do we develop it or do we not? And what happens if because I say that black and white, because if we lose this applicant, the land might not be developed. So it's somewhat that black and white. Either we go with this and get it developed or we don't develop. If the land's not developed, what happens? I mean, is that contamination currently leaking? Is it currently a problem? Is it contained? And what's the negative side of not having it developed?
The containment of the material on the site right now, from my understanding, is it was contained somewhat in the past during the development of the site when they built the building. I don't really know. Mike would have to speak to that better than I could about the environmental study that he's received. I don't know that it's leaking, but like Melinda mentioned before, our funds are, the funds that we have available are usually for testing and things, not so much for cleanup as a city anyway. So we're not in the business right now of doing a bunch of environmental cleanup.
And even those funds, Jared, they're not like those are, we don't have funds. Those are the EPA's funds that we would be awarded with a grant to use. So like the city literally and legitimately does not have any funds for anything for this. So that means
the reason I asked that because I'm trying to weigh the importance of, so I'm saying if we approve this, part of it is you get a nice product at the end and you clean up the ground. If it's something that's not approved by us or the council, what are the end results? We still have empty plot of land, but we're not putting the neighborhood at any higher risk or lesser risk. It's contained within the property.
Yeah, so Murray is literally contaminated soil is everywhere in Murray. You can't get away from it. For the most part, you can't get away from it. There's been several Superfund sites. A lot of our RDA areas have been created specifically because of contaminated soils. But some interesting information that I think would be germane to this is the city, actually, the power department looked at purchasing this property last year. And I think at one point we even were under contract, or at least as a backup offer. And everyone, to my knowledge, everyone who has come in and looked at this piece of property when they have had the phase 1 environmental assessment study come back, they have turned around and walked away. And that includes us as the power company was not interested in purchasing this property because of the contamination. So I think you make a very realistic and legitimate point, Lisa, with the statement that unless there is a private owner who can have the expertise to come in and develop it and remediate the contamination, and unless there is deference given to the expenses that comes with that type of a project, I don't see this property developing. But to answer your question too about like, is it contained? The EPA, if somebody were to go out there and start, digging around, and I'm not talking about sampling the soil, right, or taking core samples of what the soil, but somebody goes out their big track hoe and they're disturbing the soil, that would be cause for a project or whatever to be shut down because we know it's contaminated. We as a city would probably go out and contact the Utah State Department of Environmental Quality and have them go out and ensure that whatever work is being done is being done with caution to ensure the safety of the public. We've done that before on other projects where we've known there's been contamination. The entire Costco sits on was contaminated and remediated. Fire clay got a lot of contamination and remediation. So that's part of the one of the things that Hamlet Development, that Michael Brodsky has done over the years, is he's done a number of these and has kind of developed that expertise, which is why then when the phase 1 came back, all the other developers that have never done this and don't have any interest in do it have walked away. But it's not been something that has been a deterrent to Mr. Brodsky. So even the fire station that we just built had contamination that we had to remediate. And I think we spent over $400,000 just on that half-acre site doing that.
I realize probably a lot of this discussion will and needs to occur in the public because it's good for the public to all understand here. So can I ask you one other quick question though? Just because I want to make sure it's appropriate for public discussion. When property is, I feel like we're considering making an exception because of this exceptional property. There's problems with it. And then it makes me want to question, as 2 of the comments did as well, whose problem is it? Like we have said, it's not the government's property, it's the landowner's property. Is it the buyer takes this responsibility on because they got it cheap, because there's a problem with it? I mean, that might be a reasonable, you bought it, sorry. I mean, I don't want to, but buy it cheap, you'll make less money. I don't know. Do you get it cheaper because it's contaminated?
So I can give you a little bit of experience, and others can give you their own. I've got something else I want to say before we finish this though, and that is regarding cleanup. The Superfund site in Midvale was an EPA Superfund site for 15 years, of which 10 I got to participate in. And who paid for that? is a total conglomeration. I don't know exactly who paid for that. I believe some of it got paid for by the federal government because the current landowners didn't come close to having the money to clean it up. In fact, I don't think the people who I know the people who originally dirtied the site didn't have anything to do with it anymore. And then to go back to them, I mean, they didn't exist. So that's a good question. Let me go down a little different path. And this is kind of...
Ned, before we leave that path, talk to me, staff. Is there any reason why I shouldn't open that can of worms in public?
No.
It's fine.
No,
I'll just add that I live on that Superfund site, so.
Well, yeah,
Explains so
they
much.
cleaned it up. They got it to the point where it could be cleaned up. So here's a point that I want to make sure it get clarified by the staff. So we've gone down this path with Hamlet development, and it's gotten a little bit, the wagon's gotten a little bit in front of the horses as far as the community seeing potential development for that site. And that's not on our agenda tonight. We've got two motions, one for the general plan and the second to amend the zoning. So we amend the zoning to M15. That's what it is, folks. It is M15. And as Jared said, you can build on it up to perhaps 15 units per acre, Jared. I mean, typically 12, but could be 15. So if it's 12, that's 92 units. And if we go down that path, God bless Hamlet development, but nothing says that if the environmental remediation costs a little more, twice as much, 3 times as proposed, you got to build more to make it pencil for the developer, which case, if we go down that path, you may end up with 90 homes, 90 residences on that piece of property. Is that true? Or am I stating that wrong?
No, technically correct. Tonight's agenda does not, and I've got a slide at the very beginning to make that clear, that the agenda tonight does not include the plan that Mr. Brodsky's shown everyone, because that's a different application. So I'll walk through that so that nobody in the public is confused by what's being proposed. That what's being proposed.
So if we go there, Jared, and we approve this, can we hold Hamlet development to what they say they want to do?
There's no mechanism for you to do that. The zoning is the zoning. And then your chance at use permits and subdivision processes. He would need, I mean, the one caveat in that I would say is that he would need a PUD to make this work, and PUDs give you some flexibility, but they also come with their trade-offs. So to get his differing setbacks and things like that to make the density work, to make 15 units work, would be much tougher for setbacks and things. So, and you have to approve all those things as a commission. So you do have methods to whittle down overall densities, but the base density is Rm15. That's 12 to 15, depending on how they approach it. It's really hard to get to fit to that extra 3. I haven't seen anybody do it since I've been here. So.
Other thoughts? We had about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
I did want to just go over a possible scenario tonight, because normally we have an odd amount of commissioners present. But if there were to be a tie vote of 3-3, we've looked up the bylaws for the Planning Commission say, if a motion is called, or the vote on the motion is called and it goes to 3-3, the motion fails. If an alternative motion is called and it goes 3-3, the application is denied. So we had that question. It's not normally anything that would happen, but with only having 6 here tonight, that would be the outcome. If it where a motion to deny split out at 3-3, somebody then made a motion to approve and it split out at 3-3, then it's deemed it would be essentially a recommendation to deny the application to the city council.
And for
But it
another,
still goes to the council.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
that was my clarification, Travis, thank you. So these are only, I mean, not only, but these are recommendations forwarded to city council for their action.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay. All right, we're going to take a 1-minute break.
I'm going to for 1 minute. I'll be right back.
Breathe.
Hey, can we
Are you ready, Jared?
You bet.
All right. Okay, I will call to order the Murray City Planning Commission meeting, April 1st, 2021. It's 6:32 p.m. And I want to welcome all in attendance, those viewing on Murray City's streaming video feed, the Facebook and the Zoom webinar. With us tonight are Commissioner Travis Ney, Sue Wilson, Jake Pearson, Lisa Milkevich, Jeremy Lowry, and myself, Ned Hacker. Commissioner Maren Patterson is excused, so I am the vice chair and have the privilege of holding the meeting this evening. So city staff that are with us this evening, Melinda Greenwood, Jared Hall, Zachary Smallwood, Susan Nixon, and Brian Farnsworth is there. So thank you all. To get started, I would like to read a statement, prepared statement regarding virtual meetings. So as the vice chair of the Murray City Planning Commission, I, Ned Hacker, have determined that due to infectious disease, COVID-19, novel coronavirus, holding an in-person meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those in attendance. So under these circumstances, Utah Code 52-4-2074 allows for electronic meetings to be held without any anchor location, so long as the public has an opportunity to view the meeting and submit public comments. So we're holding tonight's meeting, Planning Commission meeting via video conference, and the meeting is being live streamed at www.murraycitylive.com. If you're going to have a public comment to submit to the Planning Commission, you can do so via email at planningcommission@murray.utah.gov. And when we get down to the public comment portion of the meeting, I'll tell you again how to make public comment. So first agenda item, approval of minutes. We have 2 meeting minutes from the Planning Commission. 2 meetings held February 18th and March 18th, 2021. And we're going to address both of those with one motion. So I'd ask the Planning Commissioners if you've had opportunity to review those 2 sets of minutes, and if you have any comments to those, any corrections. Any comments or corrections? All right, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to those 2 sets of minutes.
Mr. Chair, I will make a motion that we approve the February 18th and March 18th, 2021 minutes as submitted.
All right, I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Travis Ney and a second by Commissioner Lisa Milkevich. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Second item, conflict of interest. Do any commissioners have a conflict of interest regarding the agenda items that we're going to view tonight?
No.
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 Yes, we have one? Did I hear a yes?
No.
All right, no conflicts of interest?
Ned, I believe Jeremy was trying to say something.
Okay, I'm listening.
Anybody else hear that?
I just said no. So
You're breaking up. You're breaking up, Jeremy.
no, I do not have a conflict of interest.
All right. So seeing no conflicts of interest, we will move on to agenda item 3, which is approval of findings of fact. And I'd ask-
Ned,
Yes.
I need interest.
Okay, so you have a conflict of interest?
I do not, but I have been advised that I need to read the following statement. As a
Okay.
member of the Murray City Planning Commission, I, Sue Wilson, want to make clear that I have not made up my mind regarding agenda item number 4 prior to this meeting. I will be making my decision regarding this application based solely on the commission packet, the presentation here tonight by staff, and information presented by the applicant in this public meeting. Further, I have not ever and will not ever make up my mind prior to our planning commission meetings. My comments on social media should not be interpreted otherwise. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, now we will move on to agenda item number 3, which is approval of findings of fact. And I would ask if commissioners have had an opportunity to review the Chavez accessory dwelling unit conditional use permit finding of fact.
Yes, looks good.
Yes.
We have a motion for that.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the findings of fact for a conditional use permit for an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, on the property address 766 West Anderson Avenue by Jean Chavez.
All right, I have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, excellent. All right, agenda item number 4, Hamlet Development requesting a general plan amendment and zone map amendment for property located at 935 West Bullion Street. So applicant I know is here, Mr. Michael Brodsky. So we'll have you come up after the staff gives their presentation, and Jared Hall is going to present for the staff.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as soon as Zach allows me to.
Hi.
Thank you. Okay. You should all be able to see a screen now that says Planning Commission meeting. Is that right?
Yes.
Fantastic. So tonight's application, as we said, is for, Hamlet Development's in their general plan and zoning map amendment requests for 935 West Bullion Street. That is the property that you can see in the aerial map here. There is an east parcel where the building and the satellite dishes are located, and a west parcel that is vacant. They are, as I said at the beginning, there's a general plan amendment and a zoning map amendment that are part of this application. This is a segment from the zoning map. You can see the 2 parcels highlighted here. They're both in the agriculture A1 zone currently. You can see the R18 zoning around it. This is a segment from the overlay that shows the future land use map that's part of the general plan, and that's why it's called a general plan amendment. It's actually an amendment to the future land use map. This is the parks and open space designation, and this is the low density residential designation. Again, you can see those areas around it in the same designations. The request, sorry, I'm going to go back to this for just 1 second. The request, as I said, is for 2 different approvals, 2 different amendments. One to this designation and one to the zoning designation, and they rely upon each other. And I'm going to go through that in just a minute, but I wanted to make clear that it is 2 different applications that we're reviewing together in one, that we reviewed them together in the staff report, and we're reviewing them together here as well. Just a little bit about the process. I wanted to make sure this is clear for the public that may not be as familiar with this as the planning commissioners are. But the applications that are being considered tonight are not for a subdivision or a development of any kind, they are for amendments to the future land use map that we just looked at and the zoning map, and only for those. Any additional development of the property that would result from those changes has other requirements to go through, subdivisions and planned unit developments and conditional use permits. And those are items that have to be applied for and then reviewed by the Planning Commission as well at a future date if the zone is changed, as has been requested. The third thing to keep in mind is that the Planning Commission is a recommending body in this instance. A lot of things that are considered like subdivisions or conditional use permits are the Planning Commission's responsibility to review and then approve or deny. In the case of zone changes and amendments to that zoning map or amendments to the future land use map in the general plan or text amendments to the ordinance, things like that, in those cases, the Planning Commission is a recommending body only, and you forward a recommendation either to approve or deny to the city. So again, the applications tonight are for the zone map amendment and the future land use map amendment only. However, we are aware that much of the public, sorry, I can't talk tonight. Much of the public has seen Mr. Brodsky's conceptual subdivision for the property. He's revised it. The one that you're looking at now is a revision to the original plan that he had. That's a result of a big a big neighborhood meeting that he held to show the neighbors what he was thinking of doing and why he was requesting what he was requesting, and to get some of their input and hear their concerns. And in response, he came up with a revision to his plan, reduced the overall density, and added single family detached homes as well as townhomes in his concept plan. Again, this is not on your agenda tonight. This is what he hopes to do if he receives an amendment to this map and this map. I just want to make sure that's clear. We put it in, and we normally do not review these kinds of things or include them for your review. But in this case, because that neighborhood meeting had occurred and a lot of the comments that we were receiving referenced the things that he was proposing to do with his particular plan, we felt like it was important for the Planning Commission to have those concept plans and materials as a reference so you would understand those comments. So that's why we've included it in your packets, in your staff reports, and why we'll refer to it somewhat tonight as well. One thing I wanted to make clear as well as we go through this presentation tonight is we have looked at a lot of comments, and I know you're aware as a commission because you've seen all those in your staff report and several more afterward as well. There emerged from those comments some sort of common themes, things that concerned folks in the neighborhood. And I wanted to try to address those as we look at the presentation tonight and understand what we're doing. And they do kind of go hand in hand with the kinds of things we need to review as a commission to understand the applications and how appropriate or inappropriate they are. One theme that emerged a lot was that the general plan says not to do this, and the future land use map says low density residential. Why have a plan if you're not going to stick to the plan? It's inappropriate as an application and should be thrown out because it's contrary to the plan. So the general plan is just in a word, not quite that simple. It's not quite that black and white. General plans are not static documents. We entertain amendments to them all the time. In fact, every 5 or 10 years in a growing community, you should expect to see a new general plan, usually 10 because it takes a couple of years to put them together. So you do a kind of a review at 5 years and see where you're headed and make sure you make some adjustments, and you do a full new general plan in 10 years, and we will plan to do that. But along the way, in a city like this that is growing and experiencing growth, and every city in the valley, for the most part it is not unreasonable to expect that we would entertain some changes and adjustments to that plan, being as complicated as it is. And it's most appropriate to look at those individually and see where they're appropriate. This table that you're looking at on that slide is data that Zach put together for us as we prepared to talk to the city council about the general plan. We wanted to know other cities in the Wasatch Front, what their kind of numbers were for these types of amendments and requests. And as you can see, we're quite normal in Murray for those kinds of things. So given that it is a living document, not a moving target really, but not a static plan, I wanted to kind of deal with that up front. It is not inappropriate to at least consider the requests that come in to amend the general plan. And most of those requests come in the form of amendments to the future land use map, which as we'll see is one map. It's an important map, but it is one map in a large document. So this is the future land use map, map 5.7. It's a part of chapter 5, which is the land use and urban design element of the general plan. So just to make sure that people understand how the future land use map that we looked at in that early slide works, I wanted to include this map as well. So you can see these colors, they look kind of like zoning designations. They function a little differently. Each of the properties in the city has been assigned a future land use category. And the two that we're looking at tonight are in two different categories, as we talked about, one in the open space and parks and one in the low density residential. Now, along with those designations, each of those categories or designations, as we call them sometimes, are detailed with intents and characteristics, and they're given corresponding zones to use as a guide for what zones are appropriate to apply to properties in those categories. In this case, again, it's the low density residential and the open space and parks. Although as we talked about the property in the open space and parks designation, we had mistaken for a part of the Rocky Mountain Power corridor that runs regionally and in the open space along with the other properties in that category. So we've dealt primarily with the low density residential and differences between that and the medium density residential. As you can see, these are the corresponding zones that are listed in that section, and they do not include Rm15 in low density residential, hence the request to change to medium density residential, which does include Rm15. It also kind of identifies in the residential categories density ranges. In the low density residential, between 1 and 8 dwelling units per acre. A typical R18 subdivision will be somewhere between 4 and 4.5 units per acre, perhaps. Density range in the medium density residential is between 6 and 15. So again, kind of a range. This is just, again, repetitive, but both of them are zoned A1, and the request is to rezone both of those parcels to Rm15. It does represent a change to that future land use map of the general plan. There are elements that we evaluate requests for changes like this against, and they're part of the general plan as well. They're not part of the map, but they're in different elements, land use elements that are part of the plan. There are all of these different elements: land use and urban design, transportation systems, economic development, housing and neighborhoods, moderate income housing, public services, and then the administration and implementation of the plan. I think it's important to note right here, and we'll maybe hit it again in a minute, but we're going to look at elements of the land use and urban design segment. That's chapter 5 that we saw the map come from, and then housing and neighborhoods and moderate income housing as well. But public services is listed here, and I have another slide about this, but it's important to note that there are no, public services includes a lot of different things, parks and recreation, but also utilities for the city. This application, or these applications, were reviewed by the public service providers for the city, water, sewer, stormwater, engineering. None of them identified issues. It doesn't go against any of the objectives or goals of the general plan with respect to public services or with respect to economic development, transportation systems. Again, we'll look at the traffic study in a minute here, but I wanted to focus on these three. And just to illustrate what I'm talking about, this is in chapter 5, land use and urban form, that element. There are 12 objectives and 19 individual strategies. All of them are intended to be used in evaluating projects, but not all of them are going to apply equally to every situation. So we look at what applies the best in our opinion, apply our professional judgment to that, and make our evaluation. So it is a complicated thing, the general plan, and you have to look at all of the moving parts to make sure you understand what's going on. To look at a few of those, just to start with chapter 8, actually, that's neighborhoods and housing. One of the things in the opening segment of this chapter is this statement at the top there. Murray is dominated by single family homes and condominiums, with large apartment complexes rounding out the primary housing type. As can be seen in graph 8.1, that's right here, there is a dearth of missing middle housing types, options between the apartment complexes and single family homes. Our consultants on this general plan identified that missing segment of townhomes and smaller multifamily unit projects as a way for us to increase our density without as many impacts. We have the east side, as you can see, 99 plus unit apartment complexes. They're kind of isolated from the communities around them. Most of them are on the east side of the city. I'm gonna keep myself from saying all of them are on the east side of the city because I don't think that's exactly correct, but generally most of them. Apartments that are mixed here, and smaller apartment units, you can see where we have that kind of lack of the missing middle. And the thinking is that the missing middle can help us to provide more available housing and diversity of housing without having as much impact as larger projects. The goal of Chapter 8, this neighborhoods and housing element, is to, as it says, provide a diversity of housing through a range of types and development patterns to expand the options available to existing and future residents. And one strategy in that objective of encouraging housing options is to support a range of housing types, including townhomes, row homes, and duplexes, to appeal to different demographics. The proposed project that Mr. Brodsky is proposing does do that. Again, 12 units per acre, up to 15 units per acre. We see in the city, just by experience and in the valley, that density, that allowed density somewhere between 10 and 12 units per acre does allow for townhomes. It doesn't do a lot more than that. Hard to develop without a lot of acreage, a true apartment complex at 12 units per acre. Moderate income housing element of the general plan, and you're probably more familiar with this as a planning commission than some of the other elements because it came up it comes up every year now, that we have to make modification element based on our requirements from the state. This kind of a change to the general plan would help us to promote all of these strategies, promoting affordable housing options and supporting a range of housing types. I did want to try to address during this slide as well, one of the things I view as a kind of a misconception about moderate income housing. A lot of comments that we received did talk about how why should we do this when these are going to sell for so much? There's no such thing as affordable housing in the valley anymore. If your townhome's going to sell for $380,000 or $400,000 and a home's going to sell for $6 million, how is that affordable? It's not. It's really not. The affordable housing that we're providing in the state right now is either subsidized in some way, or we're playing catch up trying to make the supply outstrip the demand. This goes a long ways toward that. This is addition of more units, and that's why cities are scrambling to add ways to increase their density without so much impact. We're all under mandate from the state to do that. So we're not unique in that regard, just to be clear. And we don't think that they're going to sell for $200,000 and be affordable. Not this year anyway. We'll see what happens. Chapter 5, Land Use and Urban Design. That objective number 9 at the top, to provide a mix of housing options in residential zones to meet a diverse range of needs related to lifestyle and demographics. This is a goal and objective that this kind of change supports as well. And I wanted to go over these items at the bottom, these bullets. These are from your staff report generally with a couple of changes. The Rm15 zone can allow greater flexibility to mix the housing types because of the additional density that it allows. And that's greater than the area that's around it, but the impacts of that can be manageable because it doesn't, 15 units per acre, while it seems dense in comparison, is not unmanageable. The Rm15 zone also allows that. I wanted to make sure this is understood, and we've already gone over it. It's 12 units per acre. The density bonus goes up to 15. At 12 units per acre, that's 96 units by my calculations, and 15 units per acre would give you 120 units by my calculations. There is not an ability to go beyond that in the Rm15 zone. I've seen numbers in the comments that go beyond that. I'm not sure where that comes from. But as far as I understand the zoning that we administer, 96 units or 120 units. I think Mr. Brodsky's original concept that he proposed was about 90 units and is down to 75, which results in an overall density of 9.2 dwelling units per acre. That's under the 12, obviously, but 12 is what's allowed as a base density. Now, given that, this is the property. As you can see, I've outlined it here in blue, the east parcel, the west parcel. The surrounding area is entirely single family zoning where it's developed, with the exception of some kind of natural buffers that exist. And I talked about this in your staff report, and I wanted to go over it in the meeting as well a little bit. This is Murray City property. The power department uses it for storage and a substation. To the east, that's open land, no direct adjacent neighbors. Bullion Street to the north, no directly adjacent single family neighborhood, although it's across the street. Although that's surrounded in the area by these other single family neighborhoods and zones, again, this is Rocky Mountain Power's corridor. This is a regional corridor. This land is not going to get developed. anywhere between here and Montana and Arizona. This is a large western corridor. And then to the south as well, although this is the closest proximity for single family homes, this is a 70-foot wide power corridor easement that's related to the Rocky Mountain Power Corridor and comes up to our substation. Again, this is not going anywhere. So there are some sort of natural buffers that exist that we could build upon in looking at a development here to create really significant buffers that we don't always have the ability to create. So if we add on to those, we do feel like the impacts of the additional density can be really well managed on this site. Now, that's not the case everywhere you go, not for every property. I just wanted to put that in here again to show you. Again, this is that 70-foot power corridor easement. This is the power company property, Bullion Street, and that power corridor to the west. So you have a fairly, not isolated neighborhood necessarily, but well-buffered neighborhood in any respect. Let me move on to this next slide here. 12 units per acre. One of the other things that emerged in the comments that we saw were comparisons to fire clay and concerns about the kinds of issues that come from TOD and mixed use developments, those high densities. This is a request for Rm15 zoning. Rm15 zoning does not contain the kinds of densities that we allow in transit oriented development, 80, 100 units per acre. Fire clay, the projects in fire clay are all at 60 to 78, 80 units per acre. This is what 15 or 12 units, this is what 12 units the acre looks like. This is actually up around 9th East and 5600 South. It mixes single family like Mr. Brodsky's proposing, or intends to propose, I should say, and townhouses to create an overall density of 12 units per acre on the project. But that's the kind of visual representation of density that's appropriate to consider. You shouldn't drive through fire clay and imagine that that's what we're talking about here. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Traffic came up as a consistent concern from the residents on Bullion and in the areas around. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things. This is the functional classification map that the city's master transportation contains. This is 700 West or Murray Parkway or 700 West. I forget the different names as it passes through different intersections, so I just think of it as 700 West. It's classified as a minor arterial. It's taking people not only into different destinations in the city or different connections, but through the city as well. And Bullion Street is classified as a minor or neighborhood collector. You can see Bullion Street right here, this yellow. So other comparisons that make sense for Bullion Street, for example, are here shown in yellow. Whereas this section of Vine Street, for example, that goes back up to 9th East after it crosses 5600 South, a neighborhood collector. It takes local streets feeding to it and takes them from 9th East down to 5600 South, et cetera. So it serves that kind of purpose. And we'll talk about traffic just a little more with the traffic study, but this felt like a good point at which to talk about parking because we had just looked at this. Again, with this zoning, this is not a TOD zone. It's not a transit-oriented development zone. It's not a mixed-use zone, RM15. It does not have those kind of reduction of parking allowances that you see in Fire Clay in that area, or for the metro, or in the mixed-use zones in other places in the city. This is standard multi-unit, multifamily development parking requirements at 2.5 spaces per unit. Often we see more than that just because the developer will want to provide a couple more spaces per unit. Or a couple more spaces overall, but 2.5 spaces is the minimum requirement for any development in the RM15 zone, just to be clear. So you shouldn't see the kind of parking problems or anticipate the kind of parking problems that you might if we tried to place the densities and parking reductions that we find appropriate in mixed use zones near the core of the city or near transit opportunities in an area like this. While we feel like it's appropriate for additional density, it's not appropriate for 20, 30, 40, 50 units per acre and 1 space per unit parking requirements. It's 2.5 spaces per unit. This is just the summary from the traffic study. Again, this was done with assuming 90 townhome units. You can see the data there, 640 weekday daily trips, 44 trips in the morning peak hour, 54 in the evening peak hour. This is not to say that 700 West is not difficult to deal with during peak hours. school drop off and pickup and evening and morning peaks are probably difficult, as they are on many, many streets. But the upshot of this report is that it's right here. The levels of service drops are not beyond acceptable, not impacted significantly from this potential development, under 12 to 15 units per acre, 90 units. And there's no, this plus project column indicates what do we see from the impact of this project that should be done because of the project, and there is nothing. There's no additional signalization. There's no lane widening that needs to be done based on the traffic counts and studies. There was some question about whether or not traffic counts and the traffic study performed during our current situation would be valid. The traffic engineer reached out to us and let us know they did adjust those counts upward under their seasonal conditions, and that would make it non-COVID. They can look at counts from other years. This is an area that's had other traffic counts done. And then the sensitivity analysis of the intersections that these levels of service are based on were for functions in a non-COVID environment as well. So the upshot is that 25 or 30% more traffic could be handled from other developments and not affect the level of service unacceptably. So traffic and parking, we don't have concerns. And it's worth noting too that the traffic study was provided for the reviews that were done by engineering and public works, et cetera, and no concerns or comments were noted. And they've looked at these hundreds and hundreds of times. So staff's not concerned about traffic from this particular project. It's not large enough to have that kind of impact that can be scary to consider. Just to talk a little bit more about that as well, this is a link node analysis that Zach did when we were looking at another subdivision in the area. And you can see all these red dots are actually dead ends or cul-de-sacs. So part of the problem with Bullion is functioning as a minor collector, a neighborhood collector, frankly, because it has to, because there are only a few streets that can take you all the way through. But the good news for traffic in the area, I know it's tough, I'm not diminishing that at all. The good news for traffic in the area is that there are no direct routes. So only somebody that has to would try to get through this area without using something else like 53rd or what have you. The traffic that's generated in this area is local traffic. That's what this link node analysis tells us. And this is just a section showing you the single family homes in that area. You can kind of see them very easily on their lots and all those cul-de-sacs. So traffic and parking. There were some other issues, and I don't have slides individually for all of those, but I wanted to touch on them briefly. Contamination, and we talked about this in the pre-meeting. It is a contaminated site. This was the old Highland Boy smelter site, or part of that. It was a large site, but this was part of that. There were tailings dumped on this site, and they are contaminating the soil. The applicant has more information about that process, and he can speak to it better than I can, so I'll let him do that. There were a lot of comments about impact to the schools. I just want to make it clear that we did notice the school district, that these applications had come in, as we do with every application for changes of zoning or projects. They did not respond. That's not abnormal at all. They don't usually to zone changes unless they're really significant zone changes. And as much as it may sound, oversimplified, a zone change potentially from single family low density R18 to Rm15 at 12 units the acre, 4.5, 5 units the acre, or 12 units the acre is not going to significantly impact the numbers of kids that would go to that school. And since part of it's multifamily housing, it probably impacts them even less as school district functions. And then it's important to remember too that any subdivision that comes in or residential development application that comes in afterward, we actually with PUDs require that the applicant get a letter from the school district stating that they can serve those potential students. We've never not had them say yes to those impacts to those students, that they get additional funding for new students, and the real issues are around busing and deciding which boundaries of the schools might have to change in a significant project. 75 units I don't think you'd see movement in any of those school boundaries, and they're close enough that they wouldn't be bused. Other kids might start getting bused as a result, who knows? But we leave that up to their planners. We make them aware of it, and they're aware of it all the time as well, just different developments in the city, but we've talked about that before. This particular development, they did not respond to, and we'll ask for their formal letter agreeing to serve the students if we get a zone change approved and have to process a PUD subdivision. We'll ask for that. Sorry to belabor that. Public utilities, we already talked about. These applications were circulated to all the public service providers. None of them saw anything that was of concern or not manageable through the process of development approvals. A lot of comments also were made about the potential impact to property values because of an increase in density. Coincidentally, there's a recent report from the KMC Gardner Policy Institute. It's not a study from somewhere else in the country. This is Salt Lake County, suburban Salt Lake County. New construction of apartments is actually increasing value of nearby single-family homes. When you get outside of a half a mile from the new construction of apartments, the increase to people's property value is less significant because everybody's property value is increasing right now. That's fairly obvious. But they have not. The new development brings people's property values up, at least in the short term, according to this study. We've seen other studies in the past about impact to property values. We have not seen property values decline because of new construction. Older apartments that were constructed back in the day, I don't know about that. This is apartments that were built between 2010 and 2018. That's what I have for the presentation. Besides talking about the findings, we do, as a staff, recommend approval based on these findings. That the general plan provides for flexibility we talked about at the beginning. It is not a static document. The requested amendment to the future land use map does represent a change, but we feel like it will allow potential development of the site that can accommodate the demolitions and environmental mitigation that otherwise have been limiting traditional lower density subdivision. A lot of developers have looked at this property, consulted us about it, and walked away in the last couple of years. The proposed zone map amendment from A1 to Rm15 has been considered, and we feel like the potential impacts of the change can be managed within these densities that are proposed, Rm15 zoning. And finally, that the proposed zone map amendment conforms to important goals and objectives of the 2017 general plan. As I said, we are recommending both requests. So, do you have any questions for staff at this point?
I have a
Go ahead, Travis.
Okay, I have a few questions. Can we go back to the open space on the west side of the project area? Can you explain to me how that would have gotten missed on the general plan update?
Yes.
Yes, sir. And as it did get missed, are there other examples of parcels that maybe were missed in the general plan updates that have come up in other projects?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And embarrassingly, yes, there are. We processed one for Dondi Reichman last year that we missed. They were slivers of properties that were around her lot that had never been combined to her lot. And for whatever reason, when we applied the different categories, we thought they were part of the other lots that were on the cul-de-sac in back of her property. So we misrepresented those or misidentified those. This parcel in the Rocky Mountain Power Corridor, I think we missed because of the wraparound of the easement. And again, we didn't, when I say staff missed this, I mean, I sound like I'm throwing my consultants under the bus. That's not what I intend, but we didn't necessarily review every single parcel. So when they looked at this, they looked at the wraparound, I'm sure, and the large corridor here. And it's not uncommon for the UP&L, for Utah Power and Light, Rocky Mountain Power, to own several parcels around their exact corridor, as is evidenced by this parcel here that is owned by Rocky Mountain Power. This looked like one of those, large and empty for all those years. It doesn't look like somebody wouldn't have developed that if it weren't, part of the corridor. So they tagged it. I probably missed it because of the wraparound. We have missed certain parcels. Let me just go back to the general plan map here. Those, I wouldn't even hazard a guess at the number of parcels. We used as a baseline the existing future land use map that had been part of the 2003 general plan and tried to adjust from there, although we were changing categories. So we were reducing the number of categories overall, so we couldn't just bring the whole map forward. And there's no guarantee that there weren't a bunch of mistakes in that previous map. In fact, the Dondi Reichman ones that I just talked about represent some of those that probably just got pulled forward from the old plan. So in any event, yeah, we've missed them before, and they come up once in a while. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. What is the parking requirement for R18? What are the number of spots that are required off street?
That's a great question. So single family zoning like R18, R16, et cetera, we require new construction to have 2 cars covered like a garage and a driveway leading to them that is set back the number of feet that are required. So 20 or 25 feet, but it's not stated explicitly in that zoning the way that it is for RM15 or RM10 or multifamily. Multifamily projects are required to do 2.5. Single family projects or single family homes are required to have at least 2 parking spaces for their home. And most of them by default, because of setbacks, have another couple out in front of their garage as well. Or if you're lucky, like I'm not, you have a 3-car garage and a big, huge driveway and a big 5th wheel parked in part of that. Unlucky in all those regards.
Sure. And then if we're talking about this greater project area, do we know of other mitigation efforts that have taken place to clean up, previous issues with just in that general area? I mean, the immediate neighborhoods, would they have been held under the same scrutiny that we're now holding this piece of property, or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, did we have a different standard for evaluating the soils in those areas?
I wouldn't be able to speak to that very well. The environmental hazards that existed here, I know were somewhat looked at with Chesterbrook Cove, that subdivision. I'm not sure what exactly they did to, although I know some of the property was, this property was in the Highland Boy smelter site area as well. So it's likely that there was at least some contamination. I'm not sure what was done 30 or 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago. I would hazard a guess, no pun intended, that the requirements were probably not as stringent 30 years ago as they were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And certainly not as stringent as today.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Jake, did you have a question?
Commissioner Pearson?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I do. Just a clarification, because I've heard two different things here, not during this meeting, but is the landowner the one requesting the zone change, or is it not?
Question. That's a great question. The Mr. Brodsky, Hamlet Development, has the land under contract. So he's requesting as an applicant. We actually have a requirement for our applications to be notarized with a notarized signature by the landowners as well. So he's got it under contract. So the owner's not applying, but he's applying on behalf of the owner in essence, and he'll buy it if he gets the zone changed under contract.
Thank you.
You bet.
Other comments? Commissioner Malkovich?
I have tons of comments, but we'll start with just a question at the moment. Just to make sure we're being thorough, Mr. Hall, could you address the traffic study at Bullion and Auburn? In the study, it showed it's performing at sea level, and it'll continue to perform at sea level if the zone change is approved and then the proposed construction occurs. But what are the plans with that now that we know it's a sea level? Are there any recommendations, or what are the thoughts around that?
I guess let me just go back to this. So no, there are no recommendations to do anything different because it's still functioning at a sea and would still function at a sea. You could. That's not to say that we haven't. They did also a traffic calming study, and it had some recommendations from that. Reduced lane widths, because there were some complaints about people speeding, although the top speeds were not. If those numbers are kind of interesting in the report, the top 85th percentile were speeding at just over 5 miles an hour over. So most people, only outliers are really speeding on Bullion from what was observed. But even so, it was suggested that they change the location of the indicators that tell you that you're speeding, the shame signs, I call them. I'm always never speeding, by the way. It works on me. And then it also did recommend narrowing the travel lanes, because with that hill and the open space around it and the nice wide lane, all the visual cues say to go fast. So that's why the importance of the signs, and you could do other things as well to reduce speeds, like narrowing the lanes. But beyond that, there were no recommendations to make changes to any of the intersections, even the intersection at 700 West and Bullion. There's nothing that would really improve that.
Who are those suggestions made to, and when are they triggered? Are they to the city, the property owner?
Well, they're made as part of this. So we would take them maybe as traffic, and the ones that were suggested from the traffic calming, we would probably take to Traffic and Safety Committee and say, is this something that you would be willing to do? the property owner would probably be more than willing to, it's restriping to narrow lanes. It would be up to traffic and safety to decide if they ought to do that or not. Good question.
Can I interject for just a moment, Jared? And just,
Sure.
I wanted to bring to Commissioner Pearson's attention, just on, it is included in the application, just so you know, or in the packet, there's an agent authorization that says U.S. Satellite Corporation is authorizing Hamlet Development to speak on his behalf. So that is in your packet. I wanted to make sure that that was there. So you can reference that if you'd like.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Zach.
Sure. All right, any other comments from the commissioners? Questions? Commissioner Milokevich, go ahead.
If no one else does, I have one. And I think this is a comment we'll expand upon later, but I just want to ask. The contaminated soil. Maybe we should give the applicant opportunity to speak to it, but I'd like to just know the condition of the soil currently, meaning is rainwater bleeding off and contaminating the soil beside it and endangering the community around it, or is it contained all the time currently? I know it will be.
I know what you mean, and I don't believe that it is. I mean, I don't believe that it's contaminating through rainwater, no. So I'll let Mike probably speak to that better through his familiarity with the environmental reports.
So if it were to be developed, the contamination definitely will be addressed, and Mr. Blotsky will discuss that. If it isn't developed, it is not harming anybody currently.
I don't believe it is, no.
All right.
Anything else?
Anything else? All right, so we will have the applicant come on. And Mr. Brodsky, can you speak, or are you muted? Susan normally mutes all of us, so.
Yes, I can speak. Thank you.
All right.
I've been taking copious notes as I've been listening to this, and at some point I'm going to come back to the notes for responses. But for the most part, I have a prepared presentation that I would like to go through. I do want to ask the Planning Commission first. Ryan Hales, who is the traffic engineer who was our consultant, is online with us right now. And we asked us to do both a traffic study, and based on the feedback that we got at the neighborhood meeting, we also asked him to analyze the traffic flow, speeding, and make recommendations for traffic calming, both of which he has done. Would you permit him to discuss his traffic report and his traffic calming recommendations before I go into my presentation?
Sure, I think that's fine.
Thank you. Ryan, are you available?
I am.
Commissioner, thank you.
Yeah, commissioners, thank you for letting me be here with you tonight. Mr. Vice Chair, good to see you again. For those of you that don't know, my name is Ryan Hales. We've done multiple traffic studies in the area. I have been with this commission before on numerous other projects. The project that we're talking on tonight is of course, on Bullion Street. I think Jared Hall has done a wonderful job of explaining basically the traffic study and what it is that we did. I don't want to belabor that and repeat anything that he said, but I will say that, you know, the level of service overall, we looked at the morning and the evening peak periods. There are about 1,900 cars on a daily basis that go up and down Bullion Street. That is roughly 35% to 50% of the capacity of the road. There's a lot of reserve capacity on this road. Not what a lot of people want to hear, but maybe it may not be popular, but there is additional capacity still available on the road for a project such as this. And the levels of service at the intersections are all functioning at adequate level of service. It's level of service D or better. And as long as they're D or better, we don't typically make recommendations to try and increase the level of service, because we would overplan our roadways, we would overbuild the intersections, and we would add too much infrastructure, too much maintenance, and other things to the roadway system. So we try and maintain that level of service D for near term and or long term. Sometimes when a road is built, we start at level of service B or C, and then it generally drops down to a level of service D in many locations, and that is still acceptable. As far as the speed study and the volumes, I talked about the volume and the capacity. I do want to talk a little bit about the speed. We did make some recommendations for the speeds on Bullion Street, although they're a little higher than the posted speed limit. It's not excessively high to where we would raise the speed limit on the roadway, and we don't want to raise the speed limit. So really what we want to do is we want to try and help people understand how quickly they're driving. As Jared mentioned, we talked about some driver feedback signs on Bullion Street. There's an existing driver feedback sign right now. It's a little more antiquated, and we'd like to see that modernized and have both a static display of the speed limit as well as the electronic speed limit of the actual speed of the vehicle. And that helps people draw attention to how fast they're driving. Most of them are driving on this residential street, probably not really thinking about it. The cues to them are a wide open street system. And we want to try and restrict that a little bit by giving them the driver feedback signs to help them remember to slow down. And number two, a visual cue of restriping the road at some future point when the roadway is resurfaced. And what that does, it's a passive form of traffic calming, but it really does make people driving through the area slow down, because naturally you feel a little bit more pinched in. People will move their garbage cans out to the line where the fog line is on the side of the road. And as we pinch those lanes down to 10 to 11 feet, people will tend to drive a little bit slower. Cars can park on the side, feel a little bit safer about opening the doors. And those are things that we've thought about that we think would be feasible here. And so the westbound driver feedback sign, we would potentially locate that to a place where it's a little bit more visible, and then place one in the eastbound direction as well to give that visual cue. Commissioners, I believe that's what I had for this evening. Do you have any questions of me?
All right, thank you, Mr. Hales. Appreciate that.
Actually, I'd like to add.
I'm sorry.
Oh, Commissioner Milkevich, go ahead.
I was slow, I apologize. I guess I'd like, before we jump too far ahead, just to thank Mr. Hales, because where's my count? Of the 50 responses I read, I forget where my count is. I think there was 42 that listed traffic as their number one concern. So I appreciate you attending and your feedback.
You bet, thank you.
Ryan, I also wanted to mention one other thing relative to the traffic calming recommendations. I believe that you consulted with the city engineer on what you recommended and got the city engineer to agree that those were reasonable measures that could be implemented. And as a developer, I am offering to implement them as part of our improvements. Okay.
All right, thank you. Butsky, go ahead, continue.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. This meeting was originally scheduled for February, and because of significant immediate community reaction to the posting of the meeting, I requested that the meeting be delayed so that we might have an opportunity to meet with the immediate neighbors. On February 23rd, a community meeting was conducted via a Zoom call at which there were over 120 participants. The purpose to that community meeting was to give an opportunity to describe what the vision for this property is and to attempt to receive community input, both positive and negative. As a result of the comments that we received from the neighbors at the meeting, we've made a number of changes to our original proposal. I'll discuss those changes further in my presentation. I apologize for not introducing myself. My name is Michael Brodsky. I'm the owner of Hamlet Development, and our company has been developing neighborhoods in northern Utah since 1994. And over the last 25 years, I have had the pleasure of developing many of them in Murray. Since 2000, our corporate headquarters have been located in Murray, first at 308 East 4500 South, and now at 84 West 4800 South. By the way, the 4800 South location where we are in now, while it is a mixed-use neighborhood, it was also a contaminated site. And before we were able to start building a single structure, our new office building and our new townhouses, we had to clean that site up through the Department of Environmental Quality, and I'll explain that a little bit later. It's my intention this evening to present to the Planning Commission a request to rezone this property to an RM15 zone. I originally suggested a development agreement that would restrict a specific use and design of the property to be consistent with the site plan I'm showing you tonight. But I have since found that while I've asked for that, and I've done that in other cities, Murray City does not have a provision for that. And again, I will come back to another suggestion I have that will give you an opportunity to legislatively regulate the total number of homes that I build in here and not create the situation where somebody can get the RM15 zone and then build it out to its maximum density. I've heard a lot of objections to that issue, and I will address that in a few minutes. Our request is based on the very unique issues surrounding the property. The property being discussed is approximately 8.8 acres, and it contains a 24,000 square foot office building with an array of satellite dishes that were designed to provide Albertsons with a communication facility. There's also a cell phone tower on the property. The current building is a non-conforming use on the property, and to my knowledge cannot be reused. And so it has to remain derelict until somebody comes in and tears it down. And demolishing that building and regrading around that area is part of what we would have to do to develop the property. Prior to entering into a contract to purchase this property, we were provided a phase 1 environmental assessment that was prepared for the property owner. As you've already been told, there were a number of previous developers, by the way, including Murray City, who were under contract to purchase this property. And when they discovered the extent of the contamination, they all backed out, including the city. The phase 1 identified that the property was contaminated with lead and arsenic and mine tailings. There was also a concern that when the building was built, a material called vermiculite was used to insulate the walls, and at that time, the vermiculite was frequently impregnated with asbestos. That was one of the biggest fears that we had. The first thing that we did after we entered our contract was bore holes in that building and bring the materials to a lab to analyze them. And to everybody's relief, found out that the vermiculite does not contain asbestos. So while the site still has lead and arsenic and mine tailings, the asbestos is not an issue. To answer one of the Planning Commissioner's questions, is the condition of the site dangerous today? Not really. The lead and arsenic they are not soluble, and so when it rains on them, they do not dissolve and they do not spread. They are dangerous to touch. I wouldn't want to eat them, and so because they are exposed on the surface, they still are a hazard. I know that many of you have lots of questions about what we're planning, and it is our intention to present our plans and then take your questions. The discussion points that I'm intending to cover this evening are the environmental issues surrounding the property and how we will deal with them. Concept plan of how I would see developing the property, including a discussion of density, on-site parking, and I think of some interest to you will be the buyer profiles of homeowners who have purchased townhouses from Hamlet Homes in 5 neighborhoods over the last year. And the reason I think that this is interesting is that you will be surprised at the demographic analysis of their ages, their education levels, their income levels, and as a response to the concern about overcrowding the schools, on the townhouses, the number of children that the townhouse buyers tend to have, much, much lower than a single family buyer. We are now under contract to purchase this property. Prior to entering into this contract, we met with representatives of Murray City to discuss how we could afford to clean up the site and build a community that will also provide community benefits. We suggested that we will enter into a voluntary cleanup program with the Department of Environmental Quality to clean up the property. We're also suggesting that the cost of this was so significant, and in order to absorb the cost of cleaning up the environmental contamination and regrading the property, we asked if the city would be willing to consider some additional density. We also suggested to city staff that we would construct a park that could be publicly accessed as a neighborhood park. Based on the neighborhood feedback we received that evening, we have reconfigured our plan. We've eliminated the park. There were quite a few people commenting about the neighborhood park not being something they wanted to see. We modified the density, reducing it from 90 homes to 75, and we changed the mix of homes in the community. As you'll see, we're now proposing 20 single-family detached homes that would border Bullion Street and 55 townhomes that would be in the middle of the property. Would you excuse me a second? I just need to grab myself a glass of water. Thank you. As we heard, pretty significant opposition to a community park when the perimeter of the property or redesign includes an interior neighborhood park surrounded by homes and adjacent to the cell tower. Additionally, there are pockets of open space scattered throughout the neighborhood that are more passive, that are additional passive open space areas. The neighborhood park would include amenities such as a covered pavilion, picnic tables, barbecue, and additional playground equipment. The park would be operated by the homeowners association and available for use by the residents of the neighborhood. Among the comments that we received at the neighborhood meeting was a concern for speeding along Bullion Street. You've already heard from our traffic engineer about the traffic study, as well as what we intend to do to help mitigate the flow of traffic along Bullion Street. As I mentioned to you before, the current owners of the property, Albertsons, commissioned geoengineers and environmental engineer to do the phase 1 investigation. The phase 1 identified that back in the 1800s, the property was the site of the Highland Boy smelter. As a result of this use, the property was left with levels of contamination of lead and arsenic and slag waste. Soil samples from the 1990s indicated elevated levels of lead and arsenic in the soil. Additionally, geoengineers identified illegal dumping on the property before the perimeter fence was installed. And they concluded that there was a very high likelihood that this would result in a recognized environmental condition. They further concluded that the risk of the subject property having regulatory impacts was considered high. In further discussions, we were informed that there was a high likelihood that the insulating material used in the block walls when the building was constructed contained asbestos, and I talked about that earlier. In order to fully understand the extent of the contamination, one of the very first things that we did was hired Wasatch Environmental, a local environmental consulting firm, to do further investigations of these impacts. While we expect the cleanup costs to be significant, our challenge is to be able to afford to clean up the property and turn it into an attractive, desirable neighborhood. There is a state-sponsored process to clean up a property of this nature. It involves working directly with the Department of Environmental Quality and is known as a voluntary cleanup program, a VCP. Over the last 15 years, our companies have done VCPs in Murray in 4 separate locations, and this would be our 5th. This is a unique experience that we possess. The benefits of the VCP to both the developer and the community are extensive. When we are finished with, well, let me go through the process. The process is that the developer hires an environmental consulting firm to investigate the extent of the contamination. This entails doing test borings in a tight grid across the entire 8 acres of the property. The consulting firm conducts invasive testing of the building and soils to determine what corrective action is needed. All findings and recommendations for cleanup are submitted to the Department of Environmental Quality for review and approval of the cleanup plan. The developer then engages the environmental consultant to supervise the cleanup and a contractor to perform the work. This includes on-site supervision of the cleanup work and ongoing testing of the materials being removed. And the on-site supervision is performed both by the environmental consultant, and a representative of DEQ. During the entire time that the work is being performed, the state has a representative on site watching what we're doing to make sure we comply exactly with the plan that was presented. The cleanup requires that we identify the contaminated material, isolate it, pick it up, and then put it in a repository. The repository can be a deep pit on site that is then capped with clean material all the way up to the surface. One of the concerns expressed is as we are doing the cleanup, what happens to the soil? Does it spread around? And we put monitors around the entire perimeter of the property to monitor any airborne contaminants that leave our site to make sure that that's not happening. And we monitor, those monitors are carefully looked at on a very regular basis. In order to keep the dust and airborne contaminants down, there are watering trucks on the site throughout the entire excavation property until all of the contaminant material has been disposed of. When the cleanup is completed, DEQ is able to certify that the site has been cleaned to residential safety standards. That's a certification that in some of these older surrounding neighborhoods you don't have. There's nobody 30 years ago that was paying attention to this. During the entire cleanup, I'm sorry. I think that I've reasonably described what the cleanup process is and how it is overseen. I think I'd like to ask if there are any specific questions about the cleanup process before I go on to the rest of my presentation. Is that appropriate? You're muted.
Go ahead, Commissioner Ney.
You mentioned that you have been involved in cleanup on other projects. Could you talk about some of the other contaminants you've had to deal with on other projects, and were those within the city of Murray?
All of them have been within the city of Murray. My first project was a townhouse community at 48 South and 3rd West. We did that about 15 years ago, and the contaminants on that site were lead and arsenic. The second one is Burke Hill, and I actually did 2 cleanups in Burke Hill, about 15 acres. The first cleanup was lead and arsenic, and again, we used the same process I've just described. We created areas that were repositories, and we buried the contaminated material in the repositories. The third cleanup area was also in Burke Hill. It was a smaller piece of property across from our first cleanup, and that property had both lead and arsenic and radioactive material. One handful of the radioactive material, and it wasn't in anybody's hand, it was a metaphor. One handful of material was tens of thousands of dollars to dispose of. And the most recent cleanup that we have done also in Murray is the location of my current office building at 84 West, 4800 South. That was a mixed use development. The front part of the development on about 1.5 acres is my office building. It's our corporate headquarters. The parking lot is the repository for all of the contaminated material we picked up on the 8 acres in that subdivision.
So it's fair to say you have broad experience doing this.
Yes, the type of sites that a lot of developers run from, we run at.
Mr. Brodsky,
Thank you.
approximately how much time would you estimate a site of that size would take for the cleanup?
Do you get that question? Do you understand that question?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
The investigation process will take longer than the cleanup. My point of reference right now is the site I just did clean up. The actual cleanup took 2 months. The approval and investigation took 5 months. And by the way, that was the fastest that DEQ ever saw a VCP processed and approved in their shop. And that had something to do with the fact that it was the 4th time I did it.
Mr. Brodsky, thank you for taking the time and being willing to address these properties that need to be addressed and the money. But I know you're following a standard, so you're not making the standard. So I'm not questioning your work. I'm just wanting to understand further. What is the repository? Is it just a hole in the ground? Is it some kind of container that will plastic liner? Is it cement? What is it?
Well, first off, the material is not soluble, so it will not leach into the groundwater. There's a requirement that there be a separation of 2 or 3 feet. I don't remember the exact depth, but it's around 2 feet between the water table and the bottom of the repository. The repository is just that, it's a hole in the ground. But it is then capped after you have placed all of the material. It can be capped with a variety of different material. You can use clay and then a visqueen layer and then markers to identify to anybody who is digging into the area. They hit the markers and that immediately tells them, wait a second, we've got something here we need to look at. And then there'd be a layer of clean fill. And in some instances where the repository is in a park, it might be just topsoil and sod. In other areas where the repository is under paving, the paving is the top level.
All right, thank you for that. Commissioner Malkiewicz, more?
I was just thanking him. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commissioners have questions about the environmental cleanup, hazardous waste, et cetera?
I guess I have one more question about that. I'm not sure who's the appropriate person to ask. So tell me who is. There was comments by residents, and I guess they make sense. So I guess it's a comment, my question as well. I mean, who's responsible for these kind of cleanups? I mean, it'd be nice in a perfect world, the person that spilt it should clean it up, but that's not how life is. So the person selling it, do they just lose out and sell the property for less? Or are you paying full price and then are also responsible for this? Or how does that happen a little bit?
I believe that the price of the property has been discounted based on the contamination already. I also believe that we're looking at $1,200,000 or more in total cleanup cost. And one of the things that compounds is where the array of satellite dishes are, it's in a deep hole. And in order to make this property buildable, we're going to need to deal with that as well. And so we estimate close to 40,000 cubic yards of dirt will be moved in the process of cleaning it up and regrading the property. And I want to be clear, that 40,000 cubic yards of dirt is a number that came from my engineer. That is not just attributable to the cleanup and repository. That also has to do with how that building site was excavated when they installed the building and the satellite dishes.
All right.
I can add
Anything else? Go ahead.
a little bit of additional information to that, but I think the answer to your question, Lisa, is it depends. And sometimes a property owner is willing to discount the sale of the property, knowing that there's the contamination there. That's, I think, the primary reason why most financial lending institutions require that a phase be done on a property before essentially agreeing to loan money against the property, because that impacts the value and the sellability of property moving forward. But to answer your question, again, to restate that Murray has a lot of contaminated soil. And so this is something that's very common to Murray. And I know that in the case of the smelter site overlay district, which I mentioned in the pre-meeting, that's essentially the area that the hospital, the Murray Central Station sits on, between Vine and 53rd and State, and the rail yard. There were lawsuits going back to the property owners that owned it all the way back until the time when the property was contaminated. And I believe that some of that resulted in bankruptcies, and it's all sorts of complicated. And I think essentially that is why in the end, oftentimes the federal government ends up coming in with funding from the EPA or the Superfund sites to help clean those up. The uranium mill tailings pile that's located down at the bottom of the 191, right at the river before you go into Moab, that's been an ongoing fund cleanup that the Department of Energy has been paying for the past 20 years. So when you do have an opportunity to have the site cleaned up and it doesn't involve funding from a public agency or taxpayer funds, I think that's an ideal situation.
Thank you. Great explanation. Go ahead.
Mr. Ecker, can I expand on my thought process just a little bit, because I feel like it's important. I appreciate Mrs. Greenwood's comment too, because it helps me understand. I feel like this is an extremely hard item, because as a commissioner, I'm trying to, I want to be respectful to the community. I'm part of the community, and to the applicant, because everyone here are respectable people. This applicant is a great applicant. He has gone out of his way to listen to and respond to the community, which a lot of builders don't. And I really respect that about this developer. At the same time, I want to respect the community. And I feel like, taking out my opinion of both parties, the discussions around this land is not buildable. It will never be buildable unless Mr. Brodsky is our best hope, develop this property. So I feel like we're kind of in between. Do we bend the rules so we can get Mr. Brodsky's this land developed? Or are we just okay with the fact that it might not never be developed? And to me, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the situation. And I don't know though, but that might not be a fair assessment, because as Ms. Greenwood just said, everything in Murray could be contaminated. A lot of us could be living on top of contaminated soil because it wasn't tested 30 years ago or 50 years ago. So it's just, I can't decide what's appropriate. What do you say, Mr. Ney?
Well, I just want to push back a little bit on the idea that we're bending the rules. This is a legal process. He is entitled to go through this legal process. So there's no bending of rules here. He is simply coming forward with an application, and we're hearing the application on its merits. So, let's just be clear about that.
No, exactly. Thank you for that clarification. We're not bending rules. We're just deciding when it's appropriate to change things and when it's not. Thank you for that clarification.
All right. Any other comments? Otherwise, Mr. Brodsky, why don't you continue with your presentation?
Thank you very much. I don't have a whole lot more. Much of the rest of this discussion is just to provide you some facts that relate to the property. Fencing, we're proposing to fence the south property line with a 6-foot high white vinyl fence. Any additional fencing that will be done at the city's direction to us. There is also a substantial stand of mature trees along Bullion Street. To the extent that we can put driveways in because we have design with houses facing Bullion Street as they are on the other side of the street. We will make every effort to save as many of those trees as possible. I want to reiterate that these homes are not apartments. They are fee simple townhomes and single family detached homes. That means each home is individually owned. Affordability is a major issue in our area today. And while these are not entry-level homes, and these are not for low-income people, I expect the average purchase price to be close to $400,000 for the townhomes and into the $500,000 and $600,000 range for the single-family homes. We have asked our BET to build the townhouses. Ooh, I beg your pardon. We've asked our BET homes to do the townhouses, and part of the presentation I've given you is a example of their architecture. When we presented that architecture at the neighborhood meeting, we were very bluntly told that they were ugly. And I went back and had discussions with Carbet because I agreed, and they redesigned them, and we're showing you an upgraded design from what was proposed initially. I also want to talk about the buyer profile, because I think you'll find that interesting. And these buyer statistics are based on hundreds of homes that Hamlet has built over the last years, actually over the last 4 years in 5 neighborhoods. The average age of our buyer, 40% are between 25 and 34 years old. 25% are between 35 and 44 years old, and 34% are between 45 and 55 years old. And again, those are the average age of a townhouse buyer. Their income level, 34% of them earn between $55,000 and $95,000, and 62% earn between $96,000 and $155,000. These are reasonably affluent buyers. Education, 66% have an undergraduate degree, and another 18% have advanced degrees. They are very well educated. Within the townhouse neighborhoods, 67% do not have children. By contrast, during that same period of time, the single family homes that Hamlet sold averaged two and a half times the number of children that were in the townhouse community. I've talked to you already about traffic, so I don't think I need to go into that. And the last thing that I want to suggest is a little painful to me, because I'm going to suggest that you table me tonight. And the reason that I am going to suggest you table me is that after some discussion and consultation, and this not a recommendation, but a suggestion from one of your constituents. One of the major concerns that I've heard is that if I get a rezone to RM15, then there is nothing to stop me really from building out the full density. And so the question arises, how do you control that? And the suggestion that came from Dan Fazzini, and I believe Dan was a planning commissioner in Taylorsville, and I thought his suggestion was really that we request that you rezone portion of the property to R16, and you rezone a portion of the property to RM15. And by doing that, maximize the amount of density that anybody is permitted to build in this neighborhood. I know that we are about to open this for public comment, and to the extent I am able, I'll try and answer public comment questions. But I leave you with that last suggestion about rezoning it to a different use instead of the RM15.
So did I hear you right? You're requesting that we table this, your request?
Yeah, I'm afraid you heard me right.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Hacker, can I
Yes.
have a point of order for the staff? First, I have to say that's what I really respect this about this applicant, that he's considering this. Staff, tell us more about the process around that, please.
And anybody else on staff, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, okay? To do what Mr. Brodsky is suggesting, to change the application and have part of the property under application for R16 and part of the property under application for RM15 to solidify and limit that overall density to what he's suggesting. I don't think tabling is actually the right term. I think we'd be removing the application and reapplying. So what it would mean for us would be a modified or a new application that we would then notice again and post again and bring to the Planning Commission again as a new application based on the comments. Is that? Yeah, I saw a hand, Jake. Was that?
Yeah. So how does that work if the current property lines, wouldn't you have to zone each property a certain zone? And
Yes.
the way they have that laid out, I don't know how that would work. And maybe Michael could speak to that, but.
You're a relatively new commissioner. I am super impressed. That's exactly, that's an issue. So what we would do, there's a couple of ways to deal with it, but it is an issue. We don't do different zones on single properties. So it would be a contingency of the rezone if it were approved, or we'd likely, the good part of, or the beneficial part of it is that he already has 2 parcels. So we, instead of combining those parcels, we keep the 2 parcels, and we can probably through lot line adjustment, make those parcels north to south instead of east to west as they are. That's a little complicated, but we could do that on contingency of the zone change that he's proposing. So we don't get rid of the lines, we modify them instead. Yeah.
Can lot line adjustment occur without him owning the property? I guess it could be the same
Yeah.
process as here.
Same kind of process. Susan is our resident lot line adjustment expert, so I'll let her figure that out as we go forward. There'd be a way to deal with it. It just would depend exactly what it would be. I'm not able to say right now. We'd have to look at what he proposed. But it could be a contingency of that kind of zone change as long as we have the 2 properties to deal with. Yeah.
Another comment, I hope this is appropriate here, just so the public understands that the applicant's willing to spend more money and time to make sure the community's happy. Because this is all money and time to postpone this, and without any assurance that it will go through.
True.
Because we still don't know how the committee feels as a whole or the council feels as a whole.
That's all true.
Good point. And
Could I make a comment?
go ahead, Ms. Nixon.
Mr. Brodsky would technically have to withdraw his application, and then we would take a new application based on his suggestion of 2 separate zonings. So he'd have to withdraw, and then we would start the process over with a new application. And then as far as the boundary line adjustments, it would be parcel line adjustments, not lot line adjustments, because they're not subdivisions. So it's just more of an administrative process, but we could do that.
That's
Okay.
easier then, right?
So can he verbally withdraw that during this meeting, or would we have to do a motion to do that?
That would be his prerogative, yeah. If he withdraws the application and then reapplies, he would reapply like Susan described, reapply with us for R16 and RM15 instead. And we would renotice that, tell the neighbors, et cetera, and begin this process anew with a different application.
Yeah, it's he could withdraw at any time. We recently had 3 different applications that were withdrawn before or after they went to Planning Commission and before they went to the City Council for approval. We do like to have something like that officially done, but in this case, if Mr. Brodsky is so inclined, he could just do that here in the meeting, and we make sure it gets entered into the next week. have our official tracking for a request like that.
So in that case, I don't see it's appropriate to go forward with any public comment tonight.
That's
It's a
true.
little unfortunate for those who are participating by different means. However, I think the other side of that is Mr. Brodsky's willingness to listen to the neighbors. He already has to the neighborhood a number of times and is willing to adjust his plans to better fit the site and the his needs and perhaps the neighborhood and city needs. Yes, Commissioner Ney.
I think just as a point of order, I'd like to hear him officially say that that's what he wants to do before we say we're not opening public comment. If he agrees to that, then I'm behind you 100%.
And then one other point of order, I mean, just before we make him verbally commit to anything, I don't know, courtesy or no, because procedure doesn't allow. Should there be more discussion amongst us that if this is something that makes, how does the commission feel about that? Is that, I mean, as a courtesy does not matter. Does not sway my opinion at all, or does sway my opinion, my thoughts of the process, or is that out of order? Should we not have that discussion?
If I could jump in, I would just mention it. To be honest, it's all on kind of Michael Brodsky, Mr. Brodsky, to make that decision. If he decides that he wants to withdraw the application, that kind of ends this per se, regardless of how the commission might want to discuss it. So that, Jared, am I wrong in that, or do you agree?
No, that's well said.
All right. So in that case, Mr. Brodsky, would you like to make a formal statement that you would like to revoke or remove your application this evening?
Again, I want to reiterate that among the many comments that you received from the public was the concern that the density wouldn't be limited. And I have searched for different methods to accomplish that. And unfortunately, it was only within the last few days that the solution of the two different zones was presented. And frankly, in discussions with city staff and with other city representatives, there was strong support in going in that direction. And so I will officially withdraw my application, and I will resubmit a new application in the next day or two.
Thank you. So with that, I think, well, one, I'd like to thank you, Ms. Brodsky, for your presentation. I think it was informative to everybody. I don't think anybody on this staff, while we all live in Murray, participated in the public open house that you had back in February. And we've seen plans, potential plans, if you will. So I respect your removal of this application, withdrawal of this application. And I know your business is here. We've seen you in this commission a number of times, and respect your previous work and developments in Murray. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
So with that, commissioners, I will not open this up for public comment, but accept Mr. Brodsky's withdrawal of his application, and we will look forward to a different application in the future.
I will see you as quickly as we can get this noticed and back to you.
All right. So with that, I think item 4 is closed, and I would say to the participant on the meeting tonight, I apologize for not going through this entire process of public comment. However, I would say that commissioners have seen over probably pretty close to 90 comments, read those comments in our packets. And we will hear your comments again when Mr. Brodsky submits his refined application. So apologize for keeping you on this long and not completing this particular action, but I think that might be a good thing for all parties. Any other comments by commissioners or staff?
No, other than just, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was going to say probably just a motion to adjourn.
Well, let's leave that on the table for a second. No, that's a good motion, but let me, before we take a vote on that, I want to hear from any other commissioners who like to make a statement before we actually close up the meeting tonight. Any other thoughts, staff? I thank you all for all your participation, hard work, and look to move forward in the future. And
I do have just a quick question. Is there anybody planning on missing the April 15th meeting? Everyone good? Okay. We have, I think we're going to have four things maybe. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Just let us know if you're not going to be able to make it or whatever.
Right.
Just our typical kind of chatties.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Zach. Appreciate that. All right. So Commissioner Lowry made a motion to adjourn. We have a second. Otherwise, we can stay on.
A second at 8:08 p.m.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Wilson. All right. Again, thank you all for participating, and we'll look to see this project again in the future.
Very soon. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Brodsky, for your presentation.